One of the reasons why people love stories such as the A Song of Ice and Fire series, the inspiration for our sermon series title, is because of all the political intrigue, the politicking, face-saving, backstabbing drama of it all. Things that might be juicy to see and hear when they have absolutely no bearing on our own lives, but are miserable when you're the one in the middle of it all. There's a sense of captivation as we wonder when somebody's going to slip up or be caught out. When will this one person snap and do the dramatic thing that we've all been waiting for? We, as the audience, are privy to motivations and thoughts and events that certain characters have absolutely no clue about. It might appear that everything is fine to them, as if their world couldn't get any better. But the audience members have witnessed the back-alley deals and raving soliloquies that show us otherwise. And we hold our breaths in the suspense of it all, waiting for the bomb to go off. Our passage for this sermon in our A Song of Failures and Hope series, which is 1 Samuel chapter 18, fits perfectly well into these types of stories. Only the characters aren't imaginary creations of some human author. Rather, they are very real people who actually lived. A crazed king rejected by his god, and his secret replacement, who found himself amidst his meteoric rise of popularity among the people. A rise due to his devotion to that same God who rejected the king. And this is all according to the plan of God, the author of the story who works in the background to guide the humble young hero through these dangerous waters, even as that hero doesn't understand what he's being protected from. Over the past few sermons, we've seen David be chosen by God to be the next king of Israel, much to the chagrin of his older brothers. As well, we've seen the young man's skill in word and song as his beautiful music soothes the spirit-induced ravings of Saul. And in the last sermon, we witnessed David's humble strength as his faith in the powerful creator of the universe defeated antagonist after antagonist who dared defy the God of Israel. Eliab, his older brother, King Saul, and Goliath, the uncircumcised Philistine giant, the personification of human wickedness, who would end up as a beheaded trophy for God's chosen and humble king. All three were antagonists in the last chapter, though Goliath stood above them all. And our story picks up in the aftermath of that victory over Goliath, after David had been congratulated by Saul. And we get the flavor of success in the life of David over the rest of the tour of battle, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 to 5. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword and bow and his belt. And David went out, and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Probably waiting just outside of the tent in which Saul met with David, stood the other heroic man in Saul's army who did the job that the king should have been doing. Jonathan, the prince. He wanted to be the next one to congratulate David on the God-glorifying defeat of Goliath. Now, we might ask why Jonathan hadn't gone out to face the giant himself. After all, that would be the type of thing that he would do, as we've seen in his own previous victories over the Philistines. But, since during the other times that he proved the might of the God of Israel, Jonathan went secretly, without Saul knowing, it seems clear that Saul would not have allowed his son, his successor, to go out and face the giant. And it's not like it would be easy to sneak out and fight Goliath. The guy kinda demanded attention. So it appears that Jonathan was restrained by Saul from doing the very thing that David did. And this would be why, I believe, Jonathan would want to go congratulate the man who did what he had wanted to do, but could not. Plus, it's not like David and Jonathan didn't know each other. David was Saul's armor-bearer and royal bard. Sure, it had been a part-time job on loan for extended periods of time away from Jesse's flock, but the time David spent close to the king would also include proximity to the crown prince. They'd had to have had at least a few conversations, and probably had witnessed a kinship in the spirit of God as humble men with great faith. But in this moment after the giant's decapitation, it was as if their souls knit together. They became attached at the hip, inseparable brothers in arms who found a bond because of their mutual faith in God. It's important to point out what this relationship was, and more important, what it wasn't. There are many in our day, age, and culture who proclaim this to be an example of a godly homosexual relationship, as if the love that Jonathan had for David was romantic love. But this perspective is in total error, and not only does it read modern sensibilities into the text that no one at the time of the writing would imagine, but it also misses the entire point of the chapter. Here we see, as the title of the sermon states, everybody loves David. In verses 1 and 3, Jonathan loves David. And in verses 28 and 20, Saul's daughter Michal loves David. And that is romantic love, yes, because the word for love can include this aspect. But we also see the same word for love in verses 16 and 20, where it says that all of Israel and Judah and all the servants of Saul love David as well. So unless we're assuming that David is the most promiscuous person in the Bible, the word for love does not demand a sexual relationship. Instead, what we witness here with Jonathan's love is the beginning of a theme in this chapter with David's place as rising star. It speaks more to David's popularity than to his prowess in bed. On top of that, what we see in verses 3 and 4 reveals to us the extent of Jonathan's intentions. When the crown prince strips himself of his royal vestments, his outer robe, armor, sow, bow, and belt, this is a symbol of transference of position. Jonathan knows that his father's royal line was rejected. He understood that he would never reign in Saul's place. There would never be a King Jonathan in Israel. The princely crown that he wore was nothing but a farce meant to keep Saul happy in his self-delusion. But in this moment, after having witnessed David act like the king of Israel should have, Jonathan understands that this humble young man is the one whom God has chosen to replace Saul as king. So Jonathan clothes David in the garb of the crowned prince. He humbly endorses David as replacement for the human king of Israel. This action is Jonathan's abdication of ascension to the throne. That's what the covenant he makes with David is about. There will be no feud between them, no war for the crown, no game for the throne. They both understand God's plan to bring restoration to his humble people, and it will come through the line of David, not the line of Jonathan. Again, Jonathan wasn't the only one who loved David. The people of Israel and the court advisors of Saul witnessed everything that David did during the rest of the battle tour, and his deeds were good in their sight. Even Saul seemed to love David. The king increased David's role. This part-time internship became a full-time job. David never again went home to watch over his father's sheep. The shepherd boy had completely become a military official. But this appreciation from Saul quickly turned sour as the boys returned home from this season of war. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 6 to 16. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. The crazed raging of Saul increases during these three examples of moments with David. First, in verses 6 to 9, we see the celebrations of the nation as their army returns home. Parades rejoice as the people pass through towns and cities on their way back to Saul's capital. And women gifted in song and dance step out to lift the soldiers' spirits. And their songs spread throughout the entire land of Israel, and even beyond. Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s. It was supposed to celebrate the king's exploits and the work of his great heroic warrior equally. Thousands and 10,000s is a poetic method of saying an innumerable amount, an amount that no one can actually understand, amount so great that it's uncountable, for both people mentioned. And the escalation in the second part of the parallel is supposed to raise the whole statement, lift the entire parallel to that level. And the fact that the song gives first position to Saul should have been seen as a place of respect. They name him first and then his hero, both of whom have done great things, equally great things. But that's not how Saul saw it. He let the words get to him. Instead of seeing that the people were showing him respectful praise, he started a competition between himself and David. It's like Saul stared at his social media account and saw that David had more followers, more likes, more subscribers. Each single number over Saul's amount gnawed at his sanity. This whole thing should have pleased Saul. He was the victorious king returning home from war. But as we've seen many times with political stories of intrigue, one little whisper of envy leads to a personal war waged on a different battlefield, one fought with different weapons, which includes many a side-eyed glance of suspicion. This war is also fought with easily excusable feints, like we see in verses 10 to 12. This time it was the harmful spirit of God that gnawed at Saul. When verse 10 says that it happened while Saul raved, the Hebrew translated there is the verb for prophesy. a sort of ecstatic proclamation of the word of God. The way that this is written makes me wonder if Saul's ravings, which David was called to soothe with his musical stylings, were actually prophetic utterances that declared the truthfulness of God's rejection of Saul. Samuel might not ever come into the presence of Saul again, but God still had a prophet in the royal court, the king himself. And the king couldn't run away from the prophet that called him out because of this fact. Saul's God-given abilities calling him out for not doing as God had commanded him to do, prophesying his own failure and rejection. And so, as his body fought to stop the spirit-induced words, to shut up the godly utterances that probably felt like fire in his bones, fits of force flailed about his body. And his young bard, who once could soothe the prophetic fits, joined forces with the harmful spirit, as David was now the object of Saul's anger concerning his rejection by God. This new upstart who fought for God and had the people's favor which Saul so desperately wanted. That desperation was the very reason why he'd done what had gotten him rejected by God to begin with. Thus, in a moment of cognizance, Saul used his excuse of his flailings to throw his spear-like scepter at the young rocker boy, hoping to pin David to the wall through his heart. All with the excuse that he didn't mean to. It was because of the harmful spirit that it happened. Oops. Only God wouldn't let Saul's selfish desire stop his plans. No, the spear missed. It would be ironic if the spirit that pierced Saul to the heart worked at just the right second to keep him from piercing David to his heart. We don't know for sure, but it would certainly fit well with the author of the story nudging events to keep his plan of restoration on track. All that we know is that Saul tried this on 2 separate occasions before he realized that the lame excuse of being in a fit of prophecy wouldn't work anymore. I mean, you can only throw your spear at someone so many times before they start realizing this might be intentional. And so Saul sent David away from his presence. Why have to stare at the one who's probably going to replace you as God's chosen king while being reminded of God's rejection of you? Why be forced to face the truth when you can just send it away and cling to your precious little lie? Plus, Saul had another plan. Another way to rid himself of competition while having an excuse for his innocence. Make David a commander of a set of troops and send him into harm's way over and over again. Let Saul's enemies fight and kill each other. Win-win for him. At least, that's what he figured until the whole thing worked in a very different manner. See, Saul forgot that when a person has God on their side, God's plan will find great success. And the plan for right now is for David to be the king through whom God brings restoration to his humble people. So the Philistine enemy continued to fall in defeat. Victory after victory under the leadership of David as the man himself continued to be blessed by God. God was with him. It's a phrase that's repeated over and over again in this chapter. 3 times in this passage. Another refrain for the verses. This humble young man continues to serve God's plan and is protected in more ways than he realizes. The people of Israel continue to see David come home from battle after victorious battle, while their supposed king is hiding away in his fearful ravings. None of Saul's plans worked. His politicking continued to be thwarted by the God and author of this story. Despite the evil that Saul meant to perform in the life of David, God's plan of restoration for his humble people continued. His chosen king will reign, even while human evil sat on the throne. Yet Saul didn't learn from this lesson any better than the previous ones, and so he continued to plot and plan in secret. Only this time he would use others for his trap, specifically his advisors and his daughters. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 17 to 25. Then Saul said to David, "Here's my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Meholothite for a wife. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." And Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, Behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law." And Saul's servants spoke these words in the ears of David. And David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation?" And the servants of Saul told him, Thus and so did David speak. Then Saul said, "Thus you shall say to David, The king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies." Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Remember that part of the deal with killing Goliath had been the hand of the king's daughter in marriage. So Saul giving his daughter to David was to be expected, even if it did take a while to get around to it. But Saul meant to use it as a snare for David, some way to trip him up, or to make him look like a self-centered upstart who craved the crown. Thus when Saul offers his oldest daughter Merab as wife, it would look like an innocent thing, even though it was another plan to keep David facing the Philistines as a newly minted prime target, King Saul's son-in-law. But we can see the quality of David in his response. His humility kept him from accepting the offer. If marrying the king's daughter had been his motivation for slaying Goliath, then he would have accepted this offer in a heartbeat. And maybe had a statement of, "About time, Saul. I've been waiting, and all you've been doing is giving me job after job." Yet this wasn't his response, because his humble reason for defeating Goliath had been for the glory of his great God who had been defied. Additionally, David's words reflect the very humility that Saul once had. They almost perfectly mirror Saul's own questioning to Samuel about anointing him as king. Who am I? Why should I deserve such a great honor? David's humility revealed the exact opposite of Saul's desired outcome. Instead of a scheming little usurper, David once again showed the humility of a godly man. And so Saul gave Merab in marriage to another, possibly hoping to hear from David about how that was wrong, since he deserved a wife for his heroic act. But still, God protected his chosen king from the politicking subterfuge. Yet it did not stop Saul from continuing to plot. He heard from his royal advisors that his younger daughter Michal had feelings for David. Something like reports of seeing her watching from the window when David was reported to return, or her accidentally finding herself in the path of the young hero as he walked down the halls. Remember, she is still her father's daughter, so plots like this would fit in my estimation. And so once again Saul figured that he could use his daughter for his own plots, and a willing patsy at that. He sent his royal advisors to whisper sweetness into the ears of David. Saul even gave them the words to say. Tell David, Saul really likes you and appreciates your service. He respects the fact that you didn't demand Merab's hand in marriage, so he'd like to try again. Maybe your reluctance was because you saw that Merab was not interested in you. But Michal? She adores you. This union would be amazing. And it would please the whole nation. We all love you, David, you know that, right? The royal advisors thought that they were doing a good thing, whispering into David's ears. But little did they know that the king's words smuggled in poison. Once again, David gave a humble rejection to the offer. Do you think it's a small thing to be the king's son-in-law? It's a big deal you're talking about here. And I'm a man of little means and no reputation. I couldn't possibly deserve to marry the princess. After this, the little matchmakers tattled on David. They went to Saul and told him everything that they heard. And at this, Saul's plot went deeper. He thought to himself, so the little usurper thinks that he can weasel out of my plans for his death by saying that he can never pay the princess's dowry. Well, I'll set a difficult task for him to do. It'll make me look like a benevolent king and father, and it'll rid me of that little punk. And the king tells his advisors to let David know the price. 100 Philistine foreskins. David has a habit of referring to the Philistines as uncircumcised, so why not give them that circumcision, David? I mean, none of those men would willingly cut off their own foreskins, so it would have to be after they were dead. But that should be no difficult feat for Mr. 10,000. And hopefully those stupid Philistines will do their job and kill this slippery usurper. But once again, God protected his chosen king. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 26 to 30. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went along with his own men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. David hears the price and almost leaps for joy. The foreskins of the uncircumcised Philistines? He could do that. Much easier than a dowry of more sheep than his father's whole herd, or piles of gold. So David cracks his knuckles and calls those under his command. Hope your knives are sharp, boys. We're cutting below the belt. And not only does David get this requested dowry, but doubles the offer. He figures Michal is worth twice the price. Or maybe David's making a reference to how their ancestor Jacob worked twice the agreed upon price for Rachel, the second-born daughter who gave birth to Benjamin, Saul's tribal ancestor. David was a man of wisdom after all. Perhaps he did it on purpose. But when the soldiers set down the boxes of bloody skin, Saul felt the failure of his political scheming. Everything he did not only failed, but made David look better and better. Everybody loved David. He turned the whole nation against Saul. The king's face-saving ways felt everything slip through his fingers. He'd have to do something less covert against David, or risk the entire kingdom. We also witnessed little hints that Saul blamed God for this loss of prestige that the king had so greedily craved. The more that he saw that God blessed David, the more that he saw God be with this young warrior, the more Saul feared David. Fear and political scheming are the ways of evil that seek to upset the restorative plan of God. It's all the more tragic because Saul was once God's agent of hope in his plan of restoration. The king who had once fought the agents of human evil had become the enemy of God's plan, all because he sought people's favor instead of God's ways. A terrible horror that continues to echo even into today, when Bible scholars and teachers who seek the applause of the world instead of the truth of God. But let's not forget the truth of the final verse of chapter 18. Whenever the enemies of God came out to battle, God saw to it that his servant had more victory than any other. God continued to work his plan despite the problems of this life and the human evil that brings it about. Restoration came through God's chosen king as he protected his people. I doubt that David knew exactly how much God had protected him from. How many of the political schemes were thwarted without the prime target knowing what was going on? I mean, David knew that many enemies surrounded him throughout his life. Many of his psalms point to this. But even still, the author of his life continually protected the humble servant of God. The same can be said of us. Sure, I doubt anyone listening will ever have the amount of political maneuvering and backstabbing that David faced. But there are many problems of this life, many instances of human evil that God protects us from. And the reason why we can't count that number properly is because a large amount of those moments went by without us knowing. In the story of our own lives, we were not privy to the back-alley dealings and raving soliloquies of those who sought our harm. We received the restoration of God's humble people without even being aware of it. I'm not saying that if we do everything that God asks of us, everything's going to go perfectly. As if we have authorally gifted plot armor against all of life's problems just because we're humble. No, that's not the point of the story. Because while I've been calling David the hero of the story, God is truly the hero of the entire tale. And what we see him doing throughout this entire chapter is protecting his humble servant. Not because David was an amazingly faithful man, but because God had a plan that would not fail. A plan to bring restoration to his humble people. For many, that restoration will include protection from so many difficulties that we will never know what's been plotted against us. But for others, that protection will come in the form of strength to live through the problems as we face them head on. And perhaps for a number of us, it'll mean bowing before the plan of God even when it goes against our wishes. Like how Jonathan abdicated his princely position to David. God's protection by giving us the wisdom to bow when we thought we were going to rule. Yahweh protects even when we don't realize it, and in ways that we don't realize our protections. He's working his will in our lives, whether we recognize it or not. Whatever position we find ourselves in today, facing adulation of people while we stand in victory, facing down an army of raging Philistines, or facing the floor as we bow to the plan of God, remember that our God, the creator of the universe, protects his people. He brings restoration through his chosen king, who, for we followers of Jesus, has already faced the worst of human wickedness and risen triumphantly. He will protect us, because he is God with us.